Well, I think episode 76 better be patriotic, don't you? I'll be right back. Hello, 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 gracious gang. This is Mike Creevy, and this is the Gracious Guest Podcast. Thank you so much for joining today and listening into this exploration of faith and culture. And today we'll touch on a little bit of patriotism and just some other fun things. So thanks so much for joining. If you have not subscribed to this podcast yet, I humbly request that you do and that you share this with your friends. Kind of do whatever you can to help spread the word about this particular program and all the kinds of things that I'm trying to do over here or really explore over here when it comes to the intersection of faith and culture and trying to see a bigger picture sometimes through the most simple, ordinary, mundane things that we don't normally really maybe reflect on too much. So we like to go a little bit deeper here in this show and kind of dig in, whether it's music or movies or books or travel, food sometimes. Sometimes I have shows on that. So I'm going to have another one, I think, pretty soon on that, to be honest. So these are all the things that really kind of weave our lives together. And my contention is that there's actually a lot more going on there than might meet the eye. So I'm pretty excited here to today explore the 1980, actually as of this recording, I'm recording right now on February 22nd, 2020, and today is the 40th anniversary of this tremendous miracle on ice hockey game in 1980 at the Olympics in Lake Placid, New York, where the U.S. hockey team, which was pretty much largely and almost entirely composed of very young, fresh, sort of college age, really, guys from a couple different places across the country, largely Minnesota and Boston, two very, very big hockey hubs. Didn't traditionally get along all that well, and they come together. They train for over 6 months to prepare for the games, and that training period itself was so toilsome and so filled with challenges and anxiety and setbacks and that sort of stuff. And then they arrive at the Olympic Games in Lake Placid, New York, 1980, and then pull off this absolutely remarkable coming from behind victory over the Soviet team, which had been basically a completely uncontested juggernaut team in the world for the better part of 15 years. Gold medal champions at most of the previous, I think, 5 Olympic Games. I'm going to get into that in a second, 4 or 5 Olympic Games. So the story itself is just incredible. It really galvanized the nation at a time when we were very much struggling with belief, struggling with seeing the American dream in the future, and a lot of negativity, a lot of pessimism, a lot of fear, and this win really meant a lot more to a lot of people than just some hockey game win, some hockey match. And it's there's a great line in the movie where they're talking about the build up to this and then the anticipation and all of the letters that are coming in encouraging the team in the lead up to this match. And the main character's wife says to the coach, who's the really the main character of the movie, she says to him, this is more than a hockey game to a lot of people. It's more than a hockey match, and it's just a really incredible story in and of itself and what it did. So I'm going to get into that a little bit today, but I just want to give a big disclaimer right up front. I am one of probably the least qualified people in this planet to discuss hockey, okay? I like hockey. I find it interesting. I've just never really been into it per se. I've never really watched much of it myself. That's just a personal thing. Honestly, if there were a sport that I really got into, it would probably be one of the top 3, just because I do find it very, very interesting, and everything about it is just sort of intriguing. How it's how it flows, the fluidity of it is fascinating to me, because it's so athletically demanding, but it's also there's almost like a dance quality to it, and you can see that with a couple different sports, the grace that's involved, Of course, with hockey, there's a lot of violence as well. So it's a very violent race sometimes. But anyway, I do find it intriguing, but I'm not an expert. I don't really get all the rules and all that kind of stuff. So the challenge with this particular episode here today is that this is a movie review primarily, not so much a really in-depth breakdown of the mechanics of that game. That day, that actual matchup where they won against the Soviets. So, all right. Anyway, I guess the best place to start with this is the movie itself does this very well. And just to kind of specify some details here, it's a 2004 film, Miracle is the name of it, based on the Miracle on Ice, which we'll get to a little bit later as far as why it's called that. In a way, it seems obvious why it's called that, but there's a more specific reason. Disney movie, 2004. When it came out, I think it was the spring semester. I just come back from Christmas break of my sophomore year at Catholic University, and a friend and I met up to go see it in downtown D.C., and so it's just really cool. It came out, I think, in January or February 2004. Kurt Russell has the lead role. He plays Coach Herb Brooks. Herb Brooks, who was himself a former Olympic hockey player, who had coached many, many different teams, and then had been really dreaming of being able to coach the team in a sense that he had been on. Herb Brooks himself had been the unfortunate guy when they're trying to trim the team down before they play. He had actually been the last guy cut before they went on to then to go win the gold in 1960. So, and they point that out in the movie too, that the struggle that he had as a young man of watching from home his team that he had been on go win the gold. So that's the real part of the real challenge. But he had been a great player by all accounts. He starts coaching in Minnesota, and then he basically interviews for the position to be the head coach of the U.S. team. And so in the film, it starts off really with the very first few scenes. The opening credits really sets the stage for the seemingly insurmountable odds that this was going to be. I mean, David and Goliath, anyone? I mean, it shows a very dramatic couple-minute opener with a lot of newsreel footage and narration kind of all melted together to give you kind of a feel of the 1970s, some of the major issues going on, the just collapse of everything in Vietnam, the energy crisis, 3 Mile Island, some cultural things too, like disco and Star Wars and home video games just starting to barely become maybe sort of a thing, And so the first few minutes are just really, I think, does a really good job of setting the stage, putting you kind of in that time period so you have enough of a context. And that's the word I'd use. It really contextualizes that era. Not telling you everything, but a lot of the big things that are then going to be brought up in one way or another, just because the movie itself takes place right at the tail end of that. So we pick up in the summer of 1979, in advance of the 1980 Winter Olympics, and Herb goes in, makes his case that they have to change the way they play the game. So his pitch is basically that he wants to adopt a hybrid style of the Canadian and Soviet schools, and essentially to beat the Soviets at their own game. And this requires completely changing the way the U.S. hockey team sort of approaches the game in a way. And so, the scene's pretty funny because you can see all the guys are sort of like, what? They don't really seem to be interested in it. So he goes home, thinks he's not going to get the job, says there's 2 other coaches who already said no, so that's the only reason he got an interview. And then it proceeds to, in the next scene, he gets the call from Colorado, and they hire him. And so he's all excited, and then they really get down to business. And then you start to meet some of the team members, and it's this big montage with just a bunch of the guys showing up, and you get a little bit of their background. You kind of get this feel that, especially because of some of their college years too, playing between some of the Boston teams and Minnesota teams, there's this deep rivalry, this inability, at least at first, for these guys to get along. And it's kind of akin to your, Yankees, Red Sox sort of thing. It's like, And the one character says to the other, he's like, looking at the roster, and the other guy says, how's it look? He goes, well, a lot of guys from Boston and Minnesota. The other guy just grins. He's like, yeah, that's going to work. So there's right off the bat, there's not a whole sense of team unity. You got a bunch of real good, some kind of hotshot young hockey players, a lot of guys being also basically tempted by offers by the NHL to join up. So this is like a great thing, but there's still a lot of like self-centeredness, and understandably, right? Like these are young kids, they're looking at their future, but they're not looking at this through the lenses that Herb is. So he picks his team, and then the training starts. And a good chunk of the movie, like a good 2/3 of it, I'd say, well, at least half the movie, is their training from the summer 1979 up until the games. And then the last like 20 minutes or so of the whole movie is the actual match between the Soviets and the U.S. team. So there's this idea of high inflation in the U.S., unemployment, crime, the energy crisis, really poor leadership, during the Carter administration especially, diminished belief kind of in the American dream, and this real kind of question mark of where are we, who are we, what's the future going to be like. And so in the midst of that, you really get the sense that we, the U.S., we needed a win desperately, something to give us hope, to galvanize us. And essentially what happened was that very win, that the U.S. team ends up defeating the Soviet team. I'll get more into that a little bit later on. And that wasn't the final match of the Olympic matchups. They had to go on to beat Finland 2 days after that, 4-2, to secure the gold medal. And then they briefly have a shot of that sort of at the end as the movie's wrapping up. So anyways, a couple quick things. So the Soviet team, they're the gold medalists at this point out of the last 5 out of the last previous 6 Winter Games. They're the greatest hockey team in the world, undisputed. Everyone's afraid of them. They're seasoned professionals. They're kind of the poster children of the USSR. And as Herb Brooks says at one point when he's showing sort of match footage to the boys on the U.S. team, as they finally start to kind of coalesce and become a team through a lot of the really challenging things he throws their way, very hard on them, very demanding on them. I'll get to some of later what his team called Brookisms, some quotes that they collected that he would say a lot that ended up in the movie. And by all accounts, the movie's very, very accurate. But he says to them at one point, one of these scenes, he says, showing them Soviet footage of their practices and their method and their games and that kind of stuff. He says, their main weapon is intimidation. They know they're going to win, and so do their opponents. So he has them question that, or he tries to invite them to question that right up front. He says, I'm not going to stand here and give you a bunch of crap about how you're the greatest team in the world, because that's what it would be. Basically, you're a better team than them. No, you're not. They are a superior team. So he says, with that in mind, how do we go into this actually thinking it's possible to win? Don't go into it assuming you're going to lose. That's what everybody else does in one way or another, and then they lose. I think at that point in the movie, and I haven't double-checked this in my notes, but I think he said that over the last like couple of years at that point, they've had 100 matches, 100 wins. Like, they're just impossible to imagine defeating these guys. So by contrast, again, the U.S. team, they're young, distractible. When they're at a sort of a preliminary match early on, like an exhibition match in Norway, Brooks gets furious, and you can see it like building on his face. And as a teacher, like, I've been there before, where it's like the students maybe don't know what's coming. So the match is going on, and they're kind of tied, and you overhear a bunch of the guys are completely like scanning the crowd. He's like, "Oh, guys, check it out! Check out that blonde, like third row. Oh yeah, look, twins. Oh man, the blondes. Like, they're just gaga over like these Norwegian girls they're seeing up in the crowd, and like the coach is standing behind them, like angrily chewing his gum, arms crossed, staring at them, like Kurt Russell's like ready to explode. So the match ends. He tells the assistant coach, put him on the ice, and so people are leaving the arena. The U.S. team gets put back on the ice, and he makes them do this drill where they have to go from like the goal line all the way up to basically the next line, then all the way back, then halfway, then all the way back, then 3/4 of the way, all the way back. You've probably done this in gym class. He makes them do that, and that was one of his favorite drills. And they would do it over and over and over and over. And one of the Brookisms is, again, because he would do that. He would just yell it over and over, again, 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 like make them do it and do it and do it until it's just completely ingrained in them. And that scene is incredible because he's chewing them out. He's really rough on them. Like they shut the lights off in the arena. It's really dramatic. And in the movie, you don't really know how long this is going on. And he keeps yelling at him. And he says, and it's another Brookism. The real quote they had says, "You're looking for players whose name on the front," or this he told, I guess, reporters, said, "You're looking for players whose name on the front of the sweater is more important than the one on the back. I look for these players to play hard, to play smart, and to represent their country." The way they translate that in the movie is he's chewing them out about their lack of motivation, their self-centeredness, their inability to realize how important this is. And he starts yelling at him, and he says, "You're a team." And he says, "and the name on the front is a hell of a lot more important than the one on the back." Again, like sends him again. And, on the jersey, of course, on the front, it says USA, huge letters on the front. And then their last name on the back. And then finally you have the young man who eventually becomes the team captain, Mike Eruzione, from Massachusetts, who they call Rizzo, was his nickname. Still is, he's around. And Rizzo yells out, they had been doing this thing earlier where it's like a montage as they're training, and you'll see like individual character introductions along the way, kind of peppered in, so they get some screen time, where they'll say their name and where they're from and who they play for. That was a question he'd ask. So Rizzo yells out, just kind of unexpectedly in the middle of this, you hear him like, "Mike Eruzione!" And they all kind of turn and look, and of course the music's really dramatically building up. And he says, I forget which town, from Massachusetts. Boston University. I think he was Boston University. And like Coach Brooks kind of zooms in. He's like, "Who do you play for?" Because up till now, every time he asks that question, someone's like, UMD Bulldogs, University of Minnesota. Like they're mentioning their college or their team or whatever. And he just lets it slide. So this time he's like, "Who do you play for?" And Rizzo's like, "I play for the United States of America." And then he just stands there and he's like, "That's all, gentlemen." And then they're done. And it's a really powerful scene because he's trying to get them to understand, like, you are not here for yourself. That's another Brookism that apparently he said quite enough. You cannot win on talent alone. Gentlemen, you do not have enough talent to win on talent alone. Like, he's really, really busting them pretty rough. Another quote that he would say was, "You're playing worse and worse every day, and right now you're playing like it's next month." And I think I'm going to adopt some of these, by the way, when I really need to, motivate a student who's really just not reaching their full potential. But things like he would press them so hard, like, "Boys, I'm asking you to go to the well again. Go to the well again. Keep going back to that well. You can't be common. The common man goes nowhere. You have to be uncommon." So again, like, he was a very difficult coach. A lot of times, they hated his guts. And there's a scene in the movie when the assistant coach is talking to the team doctor, and he says to him, who's known him for a long time, he says, "Doc, you've worked with her for a long time." He goes, "Oh, yeah." Said, "Is he normally like this with his players?" And the doc says, "No." He's like, this I've never seen before. But he's like, but there's a reason. He goes, "Believe me, there's a reason for everything Herb does." And the assistant coach, Craig, says, "Well, right now he's ending up with a team full of, players who hate his guts." And the doc just kind of like sits there just thinking pensively, just says, "Well, maybe if they're busy hating him, they're too busy to hate each other." And the assistant coach chuckles, and then like he looks up like, maybe that is it. And that certainly seems to be in the movie the way it plays out. So it's so great. And again, I love, like, sports movies can be so great because I think there's a deep human life thing there, right? It's a short movie. Usually it's about a particular game or match or season that happened. A lot of times they're biopics, they're based on a true story like this one is. And what I always get out of it is, if it's done well, it doesn't matter if you've never played that sport before. There's something about the resilience of the human spirit, the importance of solidarity, teamwork, the importance of determination. Now, it can become, sometimes I think some sports movies, it can become a little too self-centered, or a little too, like if it's a boxing movie or something like that, if it's not a team sport movie, obviously it's a little more easy for it to be focused on the individual. But when it's a team movie, usually you get that teamwork lesson out of it, of course, which is important. But, sometimes you can get the idea that it's that life is just about sheer willpower, the Nietzschean kind of like will to powers. I just really have to want it and try and make what I want to be real, real. There's some truth to that, but sometimes we can take that off the deep end, and our society really is doing this, I think, all over the place in terms of a fixation on just sheer willpower and doing whatever we want. And freedom really just being about doing what I want to do. And that's a really, really diminished, impoverished, and false, quite frankly, view of what freedom is. So freedom is not, as John Paul II said, St. John Paul II put it so well, that freedom is not just basically doing whatever I want to do. Freedom is the ability to do what I ought, and the determination to do the right thing. And I think actually, in a lot of ways, this movie carries that across precisely because of how much bigger picture this was than just a hockey match. That this was about inspiring a nation. And and I'll get to in a second here to the final match a little bit. The idea of representing something greater than yourself. So I'll come back to that, like I said, in just a sec. But, they get there. There's all sorts of trouble and challenges along the way, but they get to the final match itself. And that scene is just so gripping. Like you're on the edge of your seat the whole way through it. And gradually, as the match goes on, it's becoming more and more apparent that, well, holy smokes, like they might pull this off. And the Soviet team, the coach, they're getting nervous. They're trying to figure things out, taking drastic measures, playing a little dirty at some points. And, gradually more and more, like, the arena's just filling with more people. It's absolutely filled to capacity. I think it was like 8,000 people in that arena. That arena, by the way, Herb Brooks has passed away since then, unfortunately. He actually died in a car accident, which was really tragic, but I think he was in his late 60s at the time. At the time of this match, he was in his early 40s. And but they renamed that arena in Lake Placid after him, I think, just a few years ago, which was a really nice touch. And the guys from the team were there. They're all, at this point, I mean, they're all in their 50s, at least, or 60s at this point. So, but at any rate, they get to the match. The arena's just exploding with excitement, and the crowd's yelling USA, 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 and it's just deafening. And they're getting close to the end, and Herb calls the guys over, gets them over, and he goes, "Boys, come here," and they gather up, and he just lets them, they all huddle up, and you listen, you hear the arena going nuts, and he just has this look of just tremendous pride and hope on his face, and he looks around at all the boys just so sincerely. Kurt Russell's incredible, in this movie, and he's like, listen to him, he's like, that's what you've done. And he's like, we can beat these guys, and then they get in, USA, and they go. So this just real motivating moment, and it's a super, super, it's a real tremendous America moment that I'm really stoked, whenever I watch it. If you just need a good patriotism boost, watch this movie. So basically they go out, narrowly defeat the Soviets, and the really cool thing to me is it wasn't like, a slap shot at the last second and they win the game. They get the winning goal. Now it's 4-3, and they have to hold them off for like 10 minutes. So a lot of people have pointed out, like this, I mean, everybody made such incredible contributions to this team, but if the goalie, Jim Craig, hadn't held off the Soviet onslaught for like 10 minutes, I mean, it never would have happened. So he is oftentimes held up as just such an incredible, completely unreplaceable piece of this story. Jimmy Craig, and just the incredible goaltending that he did through the rest of that match. Shot after shot of the Soviets just rabidly trying to get a tying point that they never would be able to get. And in the last few seconds, what's really cool is, by the way, the whole way through this match in the movie, they had Al Michaels, the sports announcer, who had announced at that match back in 1980, and he's, of course, gone on to be super famous in sports announcing. They had Al Michaels essentially re-record his commentary to try to make it fresh and have a good, clean copy of it, so you can hear him real cleanly through it. But when they got to the very end, the last 10 seconds, where the movie title comes from, the Miracle on Ice thing really connects to, was in the last 10 seconds, just as they're about to win, and it's clear, Al Michaels just loses it in just joy in the original recording, and he screams out that probably maybe the most famous sports announcing line of all time. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Right at the end. And the crowd is just so loud and explosive you can barely hear him in it. It's kind of a grainy recording. You can get it on YouTube. You can actually watch the whole original match on YouTube, which is pretty awesome with that ability these days. That wasn't around in '04, to be able to just, hey, I want to go see the game. So, but they tried to have him re-record that last line, the famous line, and they just couldn't get it. They couldn't capture it, and they could not really get the true original exuberance of the way he yelled it the first time. So they sort of fade his new recording, his new voiceover into it very, very well, but you can kind of tell there's a difference, so that in the movie itself you have the original clip of when he yelled that from 1980, which was really neat. So that's where the title comes from. And so basically that's kind of how the film concludes. Like I said earlier, they go on and defeat Finland 2 days later to clinch the gold. And it's a beautiful scene at the end when, he has all the team, the team captain has the whole team come up on the gold, podium to try to get all up there together. And it's just a really inspiring movie. Honest to God, like, it brings tears to my eyes when I watch it, because it's such a beautiful story, and it's a real story, and it's so inspiring. But the movie is really good. It's a really well done film. The music is fantastic. The casting is fantastic, and just, if you haven't seen it, I don't know where you've been for the last 16 years, but go check it out. It's on Disney Plus. You can get it for free if you have a Disney Plus subscription. At the time of this recording, it's because it's a Disney movie. Obviously, it's on there. I got a Blu-ray of it years ago, so we have both here at our house. But today, the time of this recording, this being the 40th anniversary of that incredible match, I thought it'd be a great time to do an episode on the movie from 2004. And the last thing I just want to point out is, in a couple years back, the Army did a slogan. They did sort of a rebranding advertising campaign that was so much better than, in my opinion, the stupid Army of One thing that was around for a while. That was completely self-centered, and I deeply disagreed with the whole approach. But they didn't ask me what I thought. So eventually somebody woke them up, and they started doing the Army Strong ones, which were almost exclusively focused on teamwork and getting beyond individual focus. And I love whoever wrote it, genius. In the trailer, I say trailer, shows how effective it was. It was a commercial, but they did it like a movie trailer. It made it dramatic. It made it something you would, like, especially like a young man would want to go do, like, yeah, I want to do that. And they had a great line where they're showing training, and they're getting over that wall that you have to climb over at some points of training. And the line, as they're climbing over it and then getting help from the other side, someone helping them over, it voices it over. The timing is perfect, where they say the strength to get yourself over, and the strength to get over yourself. What an incredible line. Because getting over yourself, me getting over myself, I'm not picking on you, but us getting over yourself in life takes strength, takes courage. It's not courageous to be self-centered and narcissistic. It's not courageous to be a jerk who only thinks about yourself all the time. It's not courageous or difficult to be an egotist. That's the gravity of sin pulls us that way, because it's not the truth. The truth is that every single one of us does not exist for ourselves. We don't come from ourselves. Everything in you and everything in me is a gift from God, is a talent or a gift that God gave us to put to use for the sake of others. That's the big, I think, takeaway from this movie. And what I love about it is how unique these guys, are in the movie, and really were in real life and still are. How unique they are, how different they are, how easy it could be for them to focus on their own differences. And diversity is incredibly important. It really is. It's a token of God's creativity. It's a beautiful reality that there's so much diversity in the animal kingdom, so much diversity in landscape and climates and that kind of stuff around the world, and diversity in us, not surprisingly. That we see diversity throughout the universe. That's great. But I would argue that diversity is not the point, though. And I think sometimes we have to be careful when we talk about diversity. Sometimes I think we focus so much on it, and we'll talk about how, diversity is our strength and stuff like that. I just don't really agree with that in the way it's presented a lot of times, because I think the purpose of diversity in God's design is unity of diverse things. That at the end of the day, all this diverse stuff is one. That's why we have bodies. St. Paul talks about this in the New Testament, right? That we are all members of Christ's mystical body if we're Christians, and that the point really of a body, or what makes a body what it is that it is a body. It's one thing in multiple members working together that can't do without each other. That the very nature of a body is to be unity in diversity. And so teamwork is just that reality, that universal reality that's built into the very fabric of existence itself, playing out on a sports field or on an ice rink. So that's my little takeaway for you here. I'm going to kind of wrap it up now. I don't want to go too long on this, but I really encourage you, go back and watch this movie. It's incredible. It's really inspiring. It's just a lot of fun, and there's some great messages in it, on a lot of different levels. 2004, Kurt Russell, Miracle, Disney movie, fantastic. Definitely go check it out. I'm Mike Creevy. This is the Gracious Guest Show. Thank you so much for tuning in here today. Share this episode, please. If you have hockey friends or American friends or movie enthusiasts or people who just like Disney, I don't know, whatever, share it with everyone. Share it far and wide. If you could, retweet my post or reshare the Facebook post. I'm really trying to get the word spread about this, and an episode like this might be one that might draw in some people, who might be curious about a couple different things. So thanks so much for tuning in today. Make sure you go to thegraciousguest.org. You can subscribe over there to the podcast. You can get the podcast on the podcast aggregator. I've got it out there on pretty much all of them. My blog posts are there. Presentation information. I can come and present on a number of things if you're interested in that sort of thing. So Gracious Gang, God bless you. Thank you for being here today. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.